What if you've been watching The Empire Strikes Back the wrong way? Most people remember it as the Dark One, the episode where everything goes wrong, the heroes lose, and Luke faces Vader before he's ready. But when you go behind the scenes into George Lucas's early notes, the rough drafts, the production meetings in the late 70s, a completely different picture starts to form. And that's exactly what happened when J.W. Rinzler dug into the Lucasfilm archives while writing The Making of The Empire Strikes Back. Inside those files, he found early drafts of Yoda's teachings, notes about how the Force really works, ideas about what happens when a Jedi begins training too late, and pages of George trying to figure out who Luke Skywalker truly is beneath the hero facade. When you line those early concepts up with the finished film, something surprising happens. Empire stops looking like a dark middle chapter and starts looking like a spiritual trial. A story about a young man who feels behind, a student who is emotionally scattered, someone who has been looking outward his whole life, and suddenly meets a teacher who forces him inward. Once you read the movie through that lens, Luke's journey stops being about power. It becomes a story about fear, about impatience, about mistaking anxiety for prophecy, and about one emotional choice that sends everything spiraling. So in this breakdown, we're going to walk through Empire the way the archive materials invite us to, through the tension between George's early ideas and the movie we ended up with. Let's get into it. When people think about The Empire Strikes Back, they usually jump straight to the big moments. Hoth, the AT-ATs, bounty hunters, Vader's reveal. But when you go back to George's early development pages, something else shows up first. He's thinking about Luke, specifically that Luke is late. In one of the earliest versions of the teacher character, long before he becomes Yoda, the mentor tells Luke that he should have started this training years earlier, that beginning at his age will make everything harder and take far longer. It's right there in the notes. Luke is not on the ideal timetable, he's trying to start from behind. Then, when that teacher evolves into Yoda, George gives him that sharp little speech everyone remembers. The one where Yoda tells Luke that all his life he has looked away, to the horizon, to the future, to excitement and adventure, never where he is, never what he's doing. Put those two ideas together and a picture forms. Luke isn't a grounded prodigy. He's powerful, but he's also scattered. He's late to the training he needs, and he has a lifelong habit of not being present. Spiritually, he's already playing catch-up. And look at where George decides Luke should train. In the development materials, he describes a bog planet, a swampy, eerie, mist-covered world. That becomes Dagobah. On the production side, the team builds the swamp as a full environment. Trees, roots, water, fog, real mud. They raise the entire set on steel so water can run beneath it. They bring in a full-scale X-Wing and physically sink it in the swamp. At one point, just to get the shots they needed, the crew had to move trees, vines, water, and the X-Wing across the stage and rebuild the swamp from scratch. Dagobah wasn't a fixed backdrop, it was constantly being reshaped. So you end up with a late, unfocused student being sent to a place that is both spiritually and physically unstable. It mirrors exactly where Luke is inside. Nothing settled, everything harder than it has to be. And that's really how Luke enters Empire, not as a calm chosen one who's already aligned with the Force, but as a young man who knows he's behind. He feels pressure to catch up, and who is vulnerable to one particular lie. If I just move faster, if I just push harder, I can fix it. Most fans see Dagobah as the place Luke goes to gain power, but when you line up George's early notes with Yoda's warnings and the design of the environment, something else becomes clear. Dagobah isn't where Luke is supposed to become strong. It's where he's supposed to lose the illusion that strength is what he needs. One of the biggest misunderstandings in Star Wars conversations is about Force visions. You see it everywhere. Was Luke seeing the future? Was it a prophecy? Was he doomed to cause it by acting? But when you look at George's early notes about the Force, the picture becomes much clearer. George describes the light side as passive and the dark side as aggressive. The light side flows through you, the dark side is something you reach for, a shortcut, a way to control outcomes, a temptation that becomes addictive. Once you start using it for the wrong motives, especially out of fear or anger, it stops being a neutral tool, it starts shaping you. Then you look at the Dagobah material. In an early draft of the cave sequence, Luke tells Yoda he's not ready and that the dark side tree will kill him. Yoda answers that there's nothing in there and that Luke is letting the dark side do his thinking. That line is important because it frames all of Dagobah as a battle inside Luke, not around him. So when Luke has a vision of his friend suffering, it doesn't arrive into a calm, balanced mind. It arrives into someone who already feels behind, someone who feels inadequate, someone who's terrified of failing the people he cares about. And when you go back and rewatch that moment in the film, you can feel all of that. The vision isn't clean or hushed like Obi-Wan's voice calling to Luke on Hoth. It's chaotic. It doesn't look like a prophecy. It looks like panic. Line that up with George's notes about how fear hijacks your thoughts, and a different reading emerges. The Force isn't always showing you the future. Sometimes it's showing you your own fear. If your mind is noisy, you see noise. If your heart is afraid, you see fear. Luke's vision can absolutely be read as the Force reflecting his terror back at him. The fear that he will fail Han and Leia, rather than a fixed script he's meant to follow. But Luke doesn't know that. He treats the image as destiny. And that's the moment everything starts to tilt, because instead of recognizing the vision as a mirror, Luke takes it as a map. And that's what sends him straight into the trap waiting for him in the next act. When Luke decides to leave Dagobah, the movie presents it with all the symbols of heroism. The music lifts, he defies his teachers, he chooses his friends over his own safety. For a lot of fans, this is the moment they point to and say, that's Luke's heart. But when you fold in the making of material, a second layer appears beneath the heroism. Irvin Kershner called this Luke's great dilemma. He talked about how Luke is walking away from something very important, not just for him, but for everyone. The scene is written so you feel both the nobility and the danger at the same time. And then George Lucas cuts straight through the romantic framing. He says very plainly that Luke screws up here, that things go bad because Luke makes an emotional decision, that Luke knows he isn't ready and goes anyway. That's not a fan theory. That's George describing the moment. So yes, Luke is motivated by love, but at the same time, this moment fits a pattern George returns to again and again, a choice made from fear that feels noble, but carries a cost the character can't see yet. And when you zoom out and put this choice next to the prequels, the parallel becomes impossible to miss. In the prequels, Anakin tries to control the future because he's terrified of losing the people he loves. He makes decisions from fear, and the dark side devours him. In Empire, Luke does his own version of that. His fear of failure pushes him to abandon his training and rush off. Even though he's been warned he's not ready, he's not making a deal with a Sith Lord, but he is letting fear dictate his actions. On paper, George calls it an emotional mistake. On screen, the moment feels brave. Together, the two readings create something richer. Luke isn't choosing between training and friends, he's choosing between fear and trust, and in this moment, he chooses fear. And that choice is what sets the rest of the story in motion. Now let's look back at the cave, the dark side tree, the moment that's confused fans for decades. Everyone has a theory about what it means. But when you look at George's development notes, the setup around the cave is very specific. Luke tells Yoda he isn't ready. He's afraid the place will kill him. Yoda answers that there is nothing in there and that Luke is letting the dark side do his thinking. The point of the lesson, Yoda says, is to move beyond fear. That framing tells you everything you need. This is not a test about power, it's a test about perception. Then look at what Luke actually does. Yoda tells him he won't need his weapons. Luke straps on his belt anyway. He expects danger. He expects a fight. And because the cave is steeped in the dark side, the very energy Yoda just warned him about, it gives him exactly what he walks in expecting: an enemy, darkness, and violence. Luke cuts off Vader's head, the helmet explodes, and inside is his own face. Put all of this together, the dialogue about fear, the warning that there's nothing in there, the fact that the cave shows him the enemy he brought with him, and the clearest reading isn't prophecy. It's a mirror. George isn't teasing what Luke might become someday. He's showing Luke what's already inside him now. The tendency to act from fear, to reach for control, to fight shadows instead of understanding them. The cave isn't warning Luke about the future, it's warning him about the present, about where the path he's on will lead if he doesn't change. By the time Luke reaches Cloud City, nothing about that duel is random. Every beat of it grows out of the decision George called an emotional screw-up. In the second draft duel pages that Rinzler discovers, Vader tells Luke that the Force is with him, but that he is not the master yet. Vader is probing him, testing him, trying to draw out anger. It lines up perfectly with George's Force philosophy. The dark side is aggressive, tempting, full of quick power with a long-term cost. The moment you lean on it, it starts to lean on you. Now watch the finished film with that in mind. Luke's fighting style is frantic. He swings hard, breathes hard, lunges in ways that leave him open. He isn't calm or centered. Vader, by contrast, is composed, blocking, advancing, retreating, hurling objects at Luke with the Force like he's barely trying. He's not just fighting Luke, he's studying him. And look at the environment they're fighting in. The carbonite chamber is basically a visual metaphor, lit from below, swallowed by steam and shadow. Luke is constantly framed on exposed edges. Vader appears out of smoke like a figure from a nightmare. The entire set is telling you Luke doesn't belong here. And all of this is built on what George already made clear. Luke knew he wasn't ready. He said it, Yoda said it, and Luke still rushed off. So when he steps into that chamber, he's not confronting Vader as an equal, he's confronting the consequences of his own fear-driven choice. That's why the duel doesn't play like a heroic showdown, it plays like a reckoning. Fans often talk about the "I am your father" moment as the thing that breaks Luke. But the truth is, the break starts much earlier. It starts the moment Luke lets his fear carry him off Dagobah. The duel simply reveals what has been true ever since. He was never going to win this fight. He was never supposed to. He strikes first, he charges, he reacts to every taunt. He gets worn down, physically and emotionally. By the time Vader reveals the truth, Luke isn't just outmatched in power, he's outmatched in clarity. The duel isn't about defeating Vader, it's about confronting the flaw inside Luke that the cave already showed him. Now we reach the moment that marks Luke's real turning point. In George's Force notes, he draws a sharp line between the light and the dark. The light side is patient, it trusts, it allows. The dark side is aggressive, controlling, reaching for power to escape fear. And once you start using the Force for the wrong reasons, it doesn't just follow your will, it starts shaping it. Now put that philosophy next to the end of the duel. Luke is hanging off the gantry, his hand is gone, his sense of identity collapsing. Vader isn't just trying to defeat him anymore, he's offering him something. Join me, rule the galaxy, take control. In other words, end your fear by grabbing power. Classic dark side logic. And this is the moment where Luke finally makes a different kind of choice. He lets go. He doesn't fight back, he doesn't cling to the platform, he doesn't try to negotiate his way out. He simply releases his grip and falls into the unknown. Within George's Force philosophy, this looks a lot like Luke's first truly Jedi act. After an entire film built on rushing, grasping, chasing destiny, Luke stops trying to control the outcome. He stops trying to force the future. He entrusts himself to whatever comes next. And the film answers that choice with something unmistakable. He doesn't die. He doesn't disappear into the abyss. The Force catches him, literally, guiding him into the underside of Cloud City, onto that weather vane, stable enough to reach out to Leia. And listen to the way he calls to her. It's not desperate, it's not panicked, it's trust. By the time we see Luke again in Return of the Jedi, he's different, calmer, more centered. Someone who can walk into Jabba's palace or Vader's presence without trying to dictate the outcome. You can trace that shift back to this exact moment, the instant he chooses surrender over control. George never stamps a caption on the frame that says this is when he becomes a Jedi. But if you take his Force philosophy seriously, and you take seriously his own comment that Luke screws up on Dagobah, it becomes hard to see this moment as anything other than Luke's first step into true Jedi maturity. Luke doesn't become a Jedi by overpowering Vader, he starts to become one the moment he stops trying to win and lets go. Now that we've walked through all of this, we can circle back to the decision that set the whole chain in motion, Luke leaving Dagobah. Most fans read this moment as pure heroism, the young Jedi who just can't abandon his friends, the student who defies the old masters because his heart is too big, and yes, there is truth there. Luke does care, he does want to help, that emotional impulse is real. But when you layer in what George actually says in the making of, that Luke screws up, that things go bad because of an emotional choice, that Luke knows he's not ready and goes anyway, a different layer comes into focus. Luke is afraid. He's afraid of losing Han and Leia. He's afraid he'll fail the people who believed in him. He's afraid that staying on Dagobah will mean their suffering is his fault. And when he sees that chaotic, fear-soaked vision, he doesn't pause. He doesn't question whether the Force is showing him the future or just reflecting his fear back at him. He doesn't ask Yoda for clarity. He treats the vision like a command. He acts from fear and interprets fear as destiny. And he rushes into a future he isn't ready for. The brilliance and the cruelty of how George structures Empire is that this mistake isn't some side quest or optional tangent. It's the point. Luke has to make that decision. Everything in the story is arranged so that he'll choose the path that feels noble but is rooted in fear. Because in Star Wars, wisdom doesn't arrive as a reward, it arrives as a consequence. Luke has been told for 2 films that he has a great destiny, but he doesn't understand the Jedi path until he makes a choice driven by fear, suffers for it, confronts the darkness inside himself, and then finally chooses trust over control. He has to see his own face in Vader's mask. He has to walk into a duel he cannot win. He has to fall into the abyss before the Force can catch him. And when you place Rinzler's making of beside the finished film, you can see exactly what George is building. Luke Skywalker isn't a flawless chosen one stepping smoothly into greatness. He's a late, frightened, hopeful young man whose greatest growth doesn't come from victory, it comes from failure. A story not just about destiny fulfilled, but about fear confronted, about surrender learned, about breaking the pattern his father couldn't. In the end, Luke doesn't become a Jedi by fighting his way forward. He becomes a Jedi when he stops trying to outrun fear and lets go.